Transforming obstacles into opportunities. The triumph of Arthur Ashe.
An American legend. A true hero. A man that was on top of the world.
After an award-winning career and a lifetime of transforming obstacles into opportunities, tennis pioneer Arthur Robert Ashe Jr. transformed America one last time with the stunning and dignified delivery of his terminal HIV diagnosis in 1992, which diminished the national stigma of AIDS and spurred a rise in empathy and education.
Why is it that for a man to hit a ball over a net, his skin color must be white? It doesn't make sense, but that's the way it was on the Virginia tennis courts in the 1950s and even in the early 1960s. Arthur Ashe didn't understand the question, and he refused to comply with the answer. Time after time, he hit the ball over the net, forcing his opponent to scramble to get it. Hit after hit after hit, he changed the rules of tennis. He made Americans realize that it didn't matter who was hitting the ball. If someone can hit a ball over the net, they should be allowed to hit the ball. Arthur Ashe stopped becoming just a black tennis player. Instead, he became a champion. During the turbulent times of the 1960s, no one would have imagined a young African-American male from the South rising up to become the top male tennis player in the world. Nor would they have foreseen the impact that this humble man would have on America. Born on July 10, 1943, into the segregated city of Richmond, Virginia, Arthur Robert Ashe Jr. was the oldest of two sons. His childhood was marked with many hardships. By the age of 6, he had already lost his mother due to a stroke. Since his mother had such a profound influence on his life, his father was worried that he would falter due to the lack of his mother's guidance. Growing up in a segregated society, Arthur's father, Arthur Ashe Sr., was very aware of the dangers that existed in the South for a young black person. His father instilled in him and his brother the importance of giving back to the community. In 1950, Arthur was watching Ronald Charity, a student at a nearby university, practice his tennis game. When Ronald offered to teach Arthur how to play, he discovered that Arthur was immensely talented and immediately took him under his wing. Charity, being an African-American athlete himself, he offered a sense of comfort and representation for young Arthur, who saw the injustice in the conditions of 1950s Virginia. Neither of them were allowed to play on most courts in Virginia that had good conditions. For two African Americans entering the country club sport, this was no cakewalk for either of them. Arthur was forbidden to play against some white opponents and banned from certain segregated courts in Richmond. Luckily, in 1953, Ronald had arranged for Arthur to spend the summer at the Lynchburg home of Robert Walter Johnson, a physician and famed tennis coach. Arthur excelled under Johnson's training. For 3 years, Arthur attended Richmond Public Schools, but in 1960, driven to excel, he accepted the offer of Richard Hudlin, a tennis coach in St. Louis, Missouri, to move there for his senior year. In his 1981 autobiography, Off the Court, Arthur wrote of his journey away from Richmond, saying, "When I decided to leave Richmond, I left all that Richmond stood for at the time. Its segregation, its conservatism, its parochial thinking, its slow progress towards equality, its lack of opportunity for talented black people. I had no intention then of coming back." Ranked the 5th best junior tennis player in the country, Arthur accepted a scholarship at the University of California, Los Angeles, also known as UCLA, where he graduated with a degree in business administration. In 1963, Arthur became the first African American to become a member of the U.S. Davis Cup team. He was ranked 6th in the world at this time, a meteoric rise for a man who's just barely turned 20. September 9, 1968.
With you at Forest Hills, where we're reaching the climax of an extraordinary event in tennis, the first U.S. Open, when we have two amateurs, Tom Akker of the Netherlands, Arthur Ashe of the United States, Richmond, Virginia, and the U.S. Army, and his first of what I'm sure will be many aces. Let's see. First game for Arthur Ashe. 5-4 for Ashe. There's number 11 for Aces Ashe. Oh boy, what a game by Arthur Ashe. Power, speed, accuracy, touch, played them all.
And he's done it!
Complete standing ovation for Arthur Ashe.
Soon after, he applied for a visa to play in the South African Open, but it was denied by the South African government because of the color of his skin. This event led him to become a vocal and longtime opponent of apartheid in South Africa, a system of institutionalized racial segregation that existed until 1994. By eventually being able to compete in the South African Open, he broke the color line and helped spike the conversation of integrating sports in South Africa, while working with South African activists to help end the system of apartheid. Professionally, 1975 was Arthur's best year in tennis, capped by his win at Wimbledon, defeating the popular young American defending champion and world number 1, Jimmy Connors.
Personally, 1977 was one of the happiest years of his life. He married photographer Jeannie Mutusami in New York City. The couple later had a daughter, Kamara Ashe, on December 21, 1986. His wife often talked about his career, his heroism, and his journey out of Richmond. While talking about his childhood, she said in many ways what he learned growing up in Richmond, not just from his family, but what was in the psyche of our society at that time. In terms of race relations, in terms of class, and just the whole struggle definitely formed him as a person. She was also a big supporter of his fight for equality, saying, "I think he really used tennis as a platform to be able to speak out toward injustice and all of the important issues that he thought needed to be given a voice." You don't want to say tennis was secondary, because tennis gave him all the opportunities he had while he was living. But what made him so extraordinary is that he didn't make that opportunity equal into something that was just for him. Arthur's family were his biggest supporters. Even from their childhood, Arthur's brother Johnny knew that Arthur had a destiny far above the norm. After returning from his first tour in the Vietnam War, Johnny voluntarily went on a second tour to ensure that Arthur would not have to go to war, and in turn allowed him to win the US Open. Without this heroic act of love, Arthur might not have made tennis history, but instead would have been fighting on the dangerous grounds of Vietnam. His career came to an abrupt halt when he suffered a heart attack in 1979. He soon retired from the game and focused his efforts on social injustice. As he underwent a second heart procedure in 1983, he received a fateful blood transfusion that would hasten the end of his life. As a young, healthy, slender man, a heart attack was the last thing anyone expected to happen to him, but nothing could be as surprising as what would come next. 5 years later, in 1988, he was diagnosed with the human immunodeficiency virus, or HIV, the disease that causes AIDS. Desperate to keep his personal life private, Ashe with his family decided that keeping this news from the public was the best decision. For 4 years, this tragic news was kept in the privacy of the Ashe home, until USA Today got a hold of the story and was anxious to expose Arthur's diagnosis of what had then been known as the gay curse. He was outraged by this news and was upset that he was put in a position where he had to lie to protect himself and his family. On April 8, 1992, Arthur called a press conference to deliver the news before anyone else could. The U.S. was shocked that heterosexual father, who was a known family man, had contracted this unspoken, stigmatized disease. Ashe was one of the biggest inspirations in the world at this time. When he said that AIDS wasn't something to be afraid of, the people believed him. Almost instantly after this announcement, there was an outbreak of AIDS research. Americans started seeing HIV in a different light. Arthur's announcement changed the stigma of AIDS. The grace and dignity he showed under immense pressure was something to be admired. His delivery changed the nation forever. Blood started to be tested before being given to patients, and limits were created on who could and couldn't donate blood. February 6, 1993. America mourned the loss of Arthur Ashe, the pioneering tennis player whom they had come to know and love. America was determined to honor his memory and legacy by continuing his crusade for equality. Additionally to his pioneering tennis career, Arthur Ashe is remembered as an inspirational figure. He once said, "True heroism is remarkably sober, very undramatic. It is not the urge to surpass all others at whatever cost, but the urge to serve others at whatever cost." He will forever be known as a champion of tennis, a champion of the people, a champion of life.